I was really excited to be asked to do my very first book launch, which is what's happening tonight. So thank you very much, Alastair. I was delighted to be asked for a couple of reasons. One is that Alastair has local roots, and I'm really proud of being a Blackwood area person. I know that Alastair went to Adelaide Hills Primary School, and that's where my 3 children went, and I've had a wonderful association with the school, and I think Blackwood is such a strong community. It's just a wonderful place to raise a family, and it's a really, I think Blackwood is, and the area is an icon of really the importance of strong relationships and the way people can look after each other in neighbourhoods, and I'd like to see that happen a lot more throughout Australia. I think we'd be a better nation if we could foster that and cultivate that. I'm also a total bibliophile. I suppose a less kind way to describe that as a kid growing up was that I was a real bookworm. I love books still, and I have a great respect as well for the role of artists in our society. I think artists perform a really important role, and by artists I include novelists, poets and playwrights. I think that we don't always understand the important role that they play, and I think we should support them more as a society, because at their best, people who do this work help us to reflect back on ourselves. They challenge us to think critically about important issues, and they encourage us through their work to constantly consider our values and to challenge ourselves about whether those values are sound and what unifies us and also what perhaps threatens us if we aren't constantly appraising our values. As well as that, of course, they also inform us and they entertain us, and that's really important as well. And I suppose the other reason that I was really happy to be asked to launch this book for Alastair was the various themes in the book, and there are various themes. And I find them all interesting, but I thought tonight I would focus on the most thought-provoking and topical, I think, and that's really our nation's treatment of asylum seekers over the last decades in particular. And the way I see it is that in 1951, we as a nation signed up with many other nations in the world to the UN Refugee Convention to basically offer asylum to people who are fleeing persecution and fear of death from their homelands. And I think we all know in our heart of hearts that nobody does that lightly, that no one chooses to leave their homeland where they are known, where they have their family connections, where they have a love of the land, and that's their culture. They don't do it lightly. The people who do that and take perilous journeys to somewhere else do so because they are essentially desperate, because in the end they feel that it's that or it's nothing for their families, and they risk death or torture or persecution. And we did that just 16 years after the end of World War II, and we know the terrible effects of World War II and the number of displaced people and refugees that were seeking refuge and asylum at that time. So we did it in good faith and with honour. And what I see now is that we are turning our back on that legal obligation that we took on, and the issue of asylum seekers has obviously become a political football, and we're not getting the leadership from the 2 political parties that have dominated Australian politics for many years. And I think they're actually taking the community with them backwards, and I don't think they need to, because I think if we actually appeal to the best of Australians, we will find that we don't agree with those values, and we can actually, and many of us are strong on that, and there are other people who can be led with good leadership. So we now seem to have an unseemly race to the bottom, and I think some of the issues and themes that come out in Prohibited Zone remind us about the humanity of people and about the way we can choose to treat those people with respect and dignity, and really upholding that notion of ourselves that we still hold very dear, which is that we are a land of a fair go, that doesn't sit well at the moment with some of the treatment that we're meting out to refugees. So this is definitely a book to get you thinking. But unless it sounds too worthy, fear not, because it's actually funny. In fact, it's very funny, and that's one of the things I absolutely loved about it. One morning, I'd started reading it, and one morning I found myself in bed regaling Mark, my husband, with snippets of this book and being very happy because I made him laugh out loud when I was reading it. Now, we do have a fine tradition of sharing books and funny bits from books that started about 20 years ago when we travelled by bicycle in Europe for a year. Being poor but happy, we had limited funds for entertainment. We did manage to buy the occasional stout in Ireland, I will say, but we did entertain each other often at low cost by sharing our small tent, particularly on rainy days when it wasn't that attractive to get out on the bikes, and reading excerpts from books to each other, and they were usually the funny bits. Well, thinking about it now, it might sound a bit lame, but it was actually delightful at the time, and it does remind me of a slower pace of life that maybe I'd like to return to one day. So in Prohibited Zone, early on, Alastair introduces us to the town of Pimba and the famous or infamous roadhouse called Spud's Roadhouse. And if you'd bear with me, I'd just like to read from the book. This is one of the excerpts that I did read to Mark one Sunday morning. I think I'll be able to do it without my specs. We'll see. Pimba's only noteworthy feature was Spud's, a ramshackle roadhouse and pub. It sat in the triangular corner of the highway junction and attracted drinkers like flies to a sheep's crotch. Just before I reached the junction, I turned right onto an access track and drove along it for 100 metres or so. I bypassed the 2 rows of petrol bowsers and parked in the dirt outside the bar. As Dicko had predicted, the place was livelier tonight. At least 20 cars were parked there. I recognised some of them, belonging to locals mostly. I guessed that the protesters had dispersed as quickly as they could after the riot and were heading back to Adelaide. I sat where I was for a moment to let the dust settle. Stars were coming out. There was no breeze and almost no movement apart from the dust. I got out of the car, not bothering to lock it, and walked up the one step to the beer garden, a gravel wasteland adorned by 4 large tables made of old railway sleepers and overhung by a trellis, upon which grew a shabby vine in chronic need of more water and less urine. No one was sitting outside, but there was plenty of noise coming from within. I pushed the door open and entered. It was Alastair's effortless evocation of the South Australian landscape and landmarks, from the northern desert regions to the suburbs of Adelaide. Local references abound. The questionably unique one-way nature of the Southern Expressway, Selleck's Beach, Port Adelaide, Port Wakefield, and the famous car park number 3 at Flinders Uni that I'm familiar with. Reading about landmarks and locales that are so well known to me was like bumping into old friends. There was nothing forced about it. After the initial surprise and pleasure that came with recognition, it seemed the most natural thing in the world. And there is a ring of authenticity about Alastair's descriptions. Indeed, some of the old friends are not always pretty, and he doesn't shy away from truth-telling about some of the more impoverished aspects of Adelaide's suburban life. But it is real, and it is Adelaide. As well as familiar landmarks, the novel is peopled with memorable characters. There's Westy, Steve West, the lead male, a likeable Aussie mining engineer with a dry wit and a gift for understatement. It was Steve West who was describing Pimba's roadhouse. He doesn't commit easily, but he has a tender streak and a rather old-fashioned tendency to chivalry that gets him into quite a lot of trouble. Then there's the feisty Cara, who leads Steve West into the adventure. She has a passion for justice, but is wary when it comes to relationships. She's a strong character who grows on the reader, just as she grows on Steve West. But I've got to say my personal favourite is Col, the truck driver who listens to Luciano Pavarotti as he drives down the Stuart Highway, because there's nothing wrong with old Luciano, mate. No bastard believes me, but Wagner is perfect for the outback. No other music matches the grandeur. Cole writes haiku poetry during his cruising hours and has even published some on badhaiku.com. I haven't checked if that's actually a real website. I must do that. And he publishes it under the pseudonym Road Train of Thought. Defying stereotypes in the best possible way, Cole has a big heart, good values, and loves his missus and his kids. So overall, Alastair's book, Prohibited Zone, is a great yarn. It moves at a cracking pace and is hard to put down. It's a healthy mix of villainy, politics, heroism and romance, with a conclusion that brings a satisfying sense of justice having been done. And all of this is overlaid with an invitation to contemplate deeper issues of how we as a nation treat the vulnerable people who've made their way to our shores to seek sanctuary from unthinkable experiences. So I'm very pleased to launch Prohibited Zone tonight. I congratulate Alastair on his achievement and I commend this excellent book to you all. Thank you.